Welcome to the Ad Nauseam podcast, where classical gourmands everywhere can finally get their fill. Join us for a delectable discussion of Greco-Roman civilization stretching from the Minoans and Mycenaeans through the Renaissance and right down to the present. And now, ladies and gentlemen, here are your hosts, Dr. David Noe and Dr. Jeff Winkle.
Welcome, listeners, to episode 157 of the Ad Nauseam podcast. I'm down in the bunker. My name is Dr. Jeff Winkle. I'm here on a rare Saturday night. That's how dedicated we are to this podcast. That's the night where we're usually out, hitting the scene, and
tripping the light fantastic.
Exactly. But here we are, dedicated to bringing classical goodness to the masses. And I'm
regular Steve Martin and Dan Aykroyd, right?
Exactly, right. A couple of wild and crazy guys.
That's correct.
That's right. So I'm here as always. That other voice that you're hearing, if you're brand new to the podcast, is my co-host and good friend, Dr. David Noe. How you feeling tonight, Dave?
I'm doing pretty well, Jeff. On the whole, I'd have to say. Yeah. That's about all I got.
That's all you got tonight?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
The muse, she can be fickle.
She can be very fickle.
Right.
Yep.
Sometimes you feel a certain sense of inspiration about the subjects on which you're going to expatiate with preciosity.
Yes.
Other times you don't really feel that.
So where are you tonight?
I don't know. It's hard to say.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's hope that muse comes flying in at any moment now.
But you're doing well, Jeff?
I'm feeling good. Yeah. As we were just talking before we hit record, I'm feeling good. I'm itching to get back into the classroom.
Yes.
So I've been away for, it's almost...
they have medicine for that.
They do?
Yeah, the itching.
The itching, oh yeah, exactly. Just some sort of cream.
That's correct.
Or maybe some oil.
Talcum.
To rub on ourselves, as we might get into later in this chapter. Right?
So you're talking about the theme for tonight.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Right. What is the theme for tonight?
The theme for tonight is Marrou.
Oh, yes. Okay.
This is going to be part 2 of Marrou and chapter 3, the title of which is Physical Education.
Yes, and this is a continuation of a now fairly long series on this book, right?
I think this will be number 12. We're going to get through the whole book at some point.
Yep.
And my thinking is that not everyone in our audience is as interested in a history of education in Antiquity as we are, but that's okay, because they don't have to listen to every one of these episodes.
Right.
But, let's face it, the book is hard to find. If you find it, you're not likely to read it.
Yes.
So we're doing the hard work for you.
Yes.
You can kick back and listen along, if you'd like, with the occasional inane blather.
Right.
To, sweeten the pill.
So what you're trying to say to the audience is stop complaining.
Correct.
And appreciate what we're trying to do for
exactly.
you. Exactly.
Okay, that's right.
Yeah.
But speaking of complaining, I've just lately I've been keeping a close watch on this heart of mine.
Yes.
I've been keeping my eyes wide open.
Yeah.
All the time.
Yeah.
I've kept the ends out for the tie that binds. And as I've been doing this in a kind of a 1956 mood with a little bit of a boom chicka boom or sort of a freight train kind of rhythm.
I'm hearing it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As I've been doing that, I've been thinking, even as I do that, I find it very, very easy to be true. And I find myself sometimes alone when each day is through.
Okay.
And when I do that, I think maybe I should have, something to drink, like a Moscato or a Riesling or a Pinot Grigio or a Chardonnay.
Yeah.
Maybe a Sauvignon Blanc, a Merlot, a Bordeaux, a Cabernet Sauvignon, a Pinot Noir, a Zinfandel, or maybe a Shiraz.
Yes.
Or maybe even a Malbec.
Okay.
And as I've been enjoying these different varietals, I've been thinking I should kind of keep track of which ones I like more than others.
Sounds like a good idea.
Some kind of a system just to be sure, right? Because I don't want to lose track of which of the different wines are more pleasing than the others, right?
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying?
Yes.
And as sure as night is dark and day is light, I keep you on my mind both day and night. I'm constantly thinking about this and the podcast. And happiness I've known proves that it's right. And so as I was thinking of what kind of a system should I use, I thought, should I go dry erase? Right? With those, those markers?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, right.
You must use these in the classroom sometimes.
Oh,
and you have to spray
and wipe it down.
With that kind of alcohol-y kind of substance. You wipe it down with a dirty, dirty rag.
Yes.
And I thought, no, that's not the way to go.
Okay.
I thought the way to go is to go old-fashioned.
Oh, how old school are we talking here?
We're talking green.
Okay.
With those little white sticks.
Yes.
Right? And we're talking maybe black.
Yeah.
Sometimes the kind of thing you could scrape your fingernails across and get that terrible shiver up and down your spine.
Yeah.
And I decided that I would do that. So every time I would try one of these new varietals, I would scratch it out there on the board. And I realized that because you're mine, I chalk the wine.
Oh, man. Well done. I had no idea where that was going, but that was great.
Yeah,
you,
thanks.
You pulled out.
Did I?
You did the trick. You pulled the with the tablecloth and you whip it out, and all the glasses and stuff are still there.
Right. The plates go into the guests' laps, right?
Right.
And the soup goes down their cravat,
Right.
probably.
Yeah.
But at least the silverware stayed in place.
There we go. Nicely done.
Thank you. So you know who we're talking about here.
Are we still talking
The
about your
great Johnny Cash.
Of course, right. The walk the line.
1956.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Apparently that's called the boom chicka boom kind of rhythm.
Yes, exactly. Which he
Freight train.
was a pioneer of.
It's incredible, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah. So there we go.
Excellent.
You know who else liked wine?
Who?
The ancients.
Oh, well, nice.
Yes, they did.
Way to pull it back.
They drank a lot of wine, and it was actually a part of their education. Speaking of which,
Yes.
we're going to get into this evening Henri-Irénée Marrou, A History of Education in Antiquity, specifically part 2 of the book, chapter 3, Physical Education.
Yes, which is very timely because
Right.
we're the 2024 Summer Olympics are wrapping up.
They're about to conclude.
I think tomorrow or the next day.
Yes.
And so much of what's in this chapter
Right.
has to do with kind of those core foundational events.
That's right.
Many of which still have a form today.
Directly relatable. So don't ask me, what am I supposed to do with a classics degree?
Yeah.
Right. Well, try understanding the Olympics without a classics degree.
Exactly.
I'd like to see you try.
Good luck.
Exactly.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
But I believe we have a corrigendum.
We do.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh.
You want to get us started on this?
Sure. So this is.
We do. It's great.
Yes. This comes from Gabriel Kuhl. Is he someone that's always kind of is he kind of breathing down our necks?
He's breathing down our necks.
Yeah.
Him and his gang,
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. So
Cool in the gang.
nice. You got me thinking of a future gag. One small note, Gabriel writes, so in your anecdote on the post-war academic career of Robert E. Lee, his institution of Washington and Lee University was placed in Tennessee, but Washington Lee is here in Virginia. And he finishes.
He's editorializing in the parenthetical.
Is
that what he's doing?
He does. He says, would Lee settle down anywhere else in the world?
I guess it has to be Virginia.
It has to be Virginia, right.
So where he finished his academic career, right, was in Tennessee, but Washington and Lee is here in Virginia.
It's in Virginia. Right.
Okay.
So, but I guess that makes perfect sense that Lee would wind up in Virginia. So
Thank you, Gabriel.
Yes.
And your gang. We're glad that you contacted us. I should also say that at the end of that email, you received that, didn't you?
yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. At the end of it, he said words to this effect: "Keep up the good work."
Yes.
So that's nice.
It is nice.
Yeah.
Right.
A little bit of a corrigendum and then a little bit of a hortandum.
Right. I'm happy that you are taking kind of the positive view of this.
No, it's just I'm just pretending.
Pretending. Okay, you're doing it very well.
Deep down, I'm really upset as usual. So Jeff, I think you have an opening quote for us.
Yes.
It's not from Marrou.
No, and I picked that just to kind of mix it up,
Keep it real.
keep it real, keep it fresh. This comes from an article entitled "An Olympic Epigram: The Athletic Feats of Phalios." Which this is a famous story that has always fascinated me about this incredible athlete from times past, where we have some records associated with him. And this is an article by one H.A. Harris from the journal Greece and Rome, back from March 1960.
Oh wow!
And this is from the very beginning of the article. He writes, "The natural desire to know how the performance of Greek athletes compared with those of today has caused a great deal of attention to be paid to one of the very few pieces of evidence we possess, the anonymous epigram, which speaks of a long jump of 55 feet and a discus throw of 95 feet.
Wow.
Dave, would you read this two-line epigram in
I was
Greek?
hoping you'd ask me to, because
Yes.
I believe that it is an elegiac couplet.
Yeah.
And so here, without any preparation, here we go. Pen tepi pen te contempladas pedes phaulos, discus sen de hecaton, pen tapale pomenon.
Nicely
I
done.
think is what it says. And what does it mean?
So Harris continues, says, literally translated, and the literal translation is important. This means Phailos jumped 50 plus 5 feet and or but through the discus 100 minus 5 feet. All right. So, I mean, we'll get into some of the particulars here, but a 55-foot long jump
Yeah.
is insane.
It is. It's more than it's about double, isn't it? It's
almost
double the current record.
Right. So the current record is 29 feet 4.5 inches.
Wow, you did some research.
So I love track and field.
Was that Bob Beeman?
No, Bob Beeman set that amazing record in 1968. This was,
but it's been surpassed.
Mike Powell surpassed it by 2 inches in 1991.
Is that because you were sitting on the bench at the time, or
was it ready to go in?
Yeah. And Powell said, "I got this, Winkle.
Exactly.
I'll take this one."
I was a very mediocre long jumper in 7th grade.
Oh, really?
Yes. Oh. I've always loved track and field. So, so 29 feet, which is a ridiculous distance for a running long jump.
Yeah.
55.
For FIDE, 55 feet. Now, we should note that the foot length was probably a little less in Antiquity.
True. Closer
to 10 inches than 12.
Yeah.
But, I mean, what's that?
Even when you account for that.
Correct. It's still well into the 40s.
Right. And then the discus throw is also more difficult, as Marrou talks about. Many of the discus have been found, and there are varying weights. Some of them are very, very heavy.
I like the fact that he mentioned, we'll get to this eventually, but some of them may have been votive.
Yes.
Disky, right? They weren't really sure. But I think you can tell is if you turn one over and it says Fisher Price, it's probably not meant for competition.
Probably, right. Yeah. But, and some of these discus were meant to be, you display them on the mantle.
That's correct.
Under mood lighting.
Yeah.
Right. And so but to compare the 95 feet, the modern world record for the discus throw for men is, I think, 243 feet.
Oh.
But you're throwing a discus that weighs a little over 4 pounds.
Yes, and whereas this one, I guess,
was likely more than that.
The size of a Toyota or something.
So,
are you going to continue on with Harris?
Yes, exactly. So Harris continues. Herodotus tells us of a Phaelos, 3 times victor at the Pythian Games, who commanded the only ship from Croton at the Battle of Salamis. Aristophanes twice refers to a Phaelos of the same period as a famous runner, while Pausanias, 2nd century AD, speaks of a statue at Delphi of Phaelos of Croton, who won 1 victory in the 200 yards and 2 in the pentathlon, running, long jump, javelin, discus, and wrestling. A scholiast on Aristophanes says that there were 2 athletes of this name, one a runner, the other a pentathlete. He also mentions a 3rd person by the same name.
Phaelos?
Yeah, Phaelos, a pickpocket, but he is hardly relevant to our theme.
So why did you mention him, Harris?
I think he just liked that little detail.
I bet Harris had a good laugh at that. I'm going to throw in the 3rd Phaelos, the pickpocket.
Yes.
That's funny.
Right.
Huh.
So I like this opening quote because it reminds me of, so much from Antiquity. There are certain details, say about ancient athletics, that we know a lot about. We know what the events were.
Right. The distances, the preparation.
Lots of victor lists survive.
But who the cheaters were.
Right. But in terms of, how did they do it?
Correct.
What were the distances? What were they actually doing? It's that silence.
Yeah. So I guess the critic who's listening, I won't mention any names. Who was that guy in Australia who was busting our chops?
Oh yeah, exactly. Oh man, I can't.
We'll think of him during the break or something. Signed up for one of my classes actually.
Did he really?
Yeah. So apparently the key to getting new students into the course is to mock them on the show. Anyway, they might be listening and they might be thinking, it was Flynn, Mr. Flynn.
Flynn.
That's right.
Yep.
They might be thinking, you guys covered this already because you did that episode on Whoa Milo. Come on, let's go.
Oh, yeah. Yes. Also
Milo,
from Croton.
Yeah, famous athlete Milo. I guess they raise him right in Croton.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, big farm boys.
Yeah, but here's the difference. That was just looking at the athletic career of Milo in and of itself, per se.
Yes.
Now we're trying to look at athletics through the lens of Marrou and education. That's the surprising part to me.
Yeah. Yep.
So as we get started, Jeff, where are we going first?
Well, why don't we read? Would you read the opening paragraph from this chapter?
Absolutely,
that will help us to kind of dig in.
Should we tell people who Marrou is?
Oh yeah, let's remind them.
Do you think that they would like to know that? So he was born in 1904 in Marseille, and he died in April 1977. A French historian describes himself as a Christian humanist in outlook. His work was, quote, primarily in the spheres of late antiquity and the history of education. He is best known for this work, History of Education in Antiquity. He also edited for sources chrétiennes the early Christian work, The Letter to Diognetus, the only manuscript of which perished in a fire at the University of Strasbourg during the Franco-Prussian War, end quote. So, Marrou, a 20th century French scholar, writing right after the end of the Second World War, and that theme has poked through a little bit from time to time.
That's right.
Where he's kind of upset about totalitarianism. And he tends to see totalitarianism in a lot of these educational practices and systems. And maybe they're there. Maybe he's not maybe he's not making it up at all. But just to note that that's kind of where he goes with this typically.
Indeed. So as we get into our topic tonight, would you read that first paragraph of the...
Oh, yeah. Is that what we were supposed to do?
That's right.
Okay. Yes. Let us now turn, says Marrou, to the actual content of this education. As I have already pointed out in my discussion of the Ephebia, gymnastics may have ceased to play a preponderant part in the education of the young Greek, but they were still the most characteristic part, at least at the beginning of the Hellenistic period. As in the very earliest times, athletics was still one of the primary distinguishing marks of the Greek way of life as against that of the barbarians. If you had found yourself amongst the Jews in Jerusalem around 175 BC, you would have discovered that adopting, quote, the customs of the Goyim, that's a quote, meant chiefly doing exercises in the nude on a sports ground. Wherever Hellenism took root, gymnasiums and stadiums and all the rest of the paraphernalia appeared, from Marseille to Babylon and Susa, from southern Egypt to the Crimea, and not only in the great cities, but in tiny colonial villages like those in the Fayum, which is Egypt. To the Greeks, sport was not merely a pleasant form of relaxation. It was a highly serious business, involving a whole complex of affairs concerned with hygiene and medicine, aesthetics, and ethics, end quote.
So I think that, I mean, somebody maybe, doing a cursory reading of this book, one of the critiques, well, you could probably apply this to a lot of study of classical antiquity, is that you only have kind of brief pockets of places where you can draw evidence from.
Right.
Even Marrou says that a lot of this comes from the Hellenistic era because that's where we find most of the records.
Yes, Hellenistic era for the audience is Alexander to Augustus. So
yes,
323 to 30 BC.
Exactly, and so you may be on solid ground asking, well, how much can we apply this broadly? Right. But having said that, archaeologically speaking, when in my myth classes, when we look at certain sites in so many of the sacred sanctuaries, you find two buildings are almost always there: the theater,
that's right,
and the stadium, that's
right.
And so you just visually see how central drama and athletics were to so many sacred and ritual practices.
Yes, I was reading this chapter earlier this week, sitting outside in the sunshine, and I was thinking just how small a role athletics played in my own education and in most people's education.
Yes. Yeah.
So lots of sport as a kid and some organized sport, but it was always extracurricular.
Yes.
It was never seen as part of my education at all.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. And I think Marrou, near the end of the chapter, he makes a comment on his own day and age, and he says something very similar. Right. And there is kind of this interesting dichotomy between kind of gym class becomes kind of like almost like a punchline, right? It's not taken seriously as part of one's education, right? The real education happens, in the books or whatever. But we also have kind of the cult of sport out there. We elevate athletes and athletic ability to, in my opinion, to an absurd degree. On the other hand, so we have kind of these two things. We don't take it seriously as a part of education, but we also worship it as a part of the popular culture.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's an interesting irony, isn't it?
And I think that a lot of that you see reflected in the very narrative that Marrou talks about the ancient world and its attitude towards sport. So what it becomes.
I guess the converse would be sport.
Nicely.
If we didn't take academics seriously, but then we worshipped the academic superstars. Can you imagine doing that?
Yeah.
So and so just signed a 6-figure contract, right?
Right. Exactly.
They've got they got their own chalkboard named after them or something like that.
Yeah. Exactly. Oh man, there is a great skit to be written about that would appeal to very few people. But
the problem is I can't think of any academic heroes.
Right.
Who are those going to be? Right.
I guess if you think about the handful of people that have crossed over, like maybe a Joseph Campbell,
but you got to cross over,
or Carl Sagan. Remember that guy?
Some Air Sagans.
Yeah.
Air
Sagans, right?
Go through.
You get the telescope.
8 variations of the Air Sagan, right? It's just very different.
Right.
That's education, we would think, physics, astronomy, cosmology, whatever, chemistry. But athletics is not education, at least in our typical conception.
Did you ever have, looking back, like, that was a really good gym teacher?
Nope.
No. Neither did I.
Can't think of one.
My gym teachers were always teachers that were hired to do something else.
Yeah.
And then were just kind of shuffled off into the gym for a couple of hours.
Had some good coaches, though.
Yeah.
Had some very good athletic coaches.
Yeah, same here.
Who also happened to be also happened to be teachers, right?
Yeah.
And maybe here's the connection. There was one in particular, Mr. Johnson, who taught algebra and was excellent at it, and who also coached athletics.
Yeah.
And was very good at it. So I think that if you can be a good teacher, you can be a good coach.
Yeah.
And vice versa, because, right, athletics is a kind of instruction.
Yes. But I think you also have to take sport seriously.
And to have some proficiency yourself.
Yes, to do it well. And I think that's.
But isn't that like being in the classroom? I mean, would you want to learn algebra from someone who couldn't actually solve equations?
No, of course not.
Right. You know, 4x equals 16. Let me just check the answer key here, guys.
Right.
No.
Yeah. No, I think that's I'm trying to say that I think that ideal of a sound mind and a sound body is rare.
And that's from the Roman satirist Juvenal, is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. So as the chapter unfolds, we have two preliminary sections, the second one of which is entitled Physical Education and Sport, and then the chapter just goes kind of event by event.
Which is it was my favorite part of the chapter.
Yes, I thought so too.
So interesting, yeah.
Yeah. So what are some nuggets we can get from the first part here? Well, at the bottom of page 116, he writes, in the first place, it is certain that children of secondary school age were given a training in sport. This was obviously the case in Egypt, for there, as we have seen, they went to the Ephebia when they were 14, but it was the same elsewhere. In Pergamus, the children had a separate gymnasium from the adults, and the Neoi and the Ephebes. Lapithus had a special children's gymnasiarch. In other cities, in Eritrea, for example, in Atalaya, the general gymnasiarch kept an eye on the children too. They could enter for competitions almost anywhere. So this is like traveling soccer team, right?
That's what it reminded me of too, yeah.
In Chios, in Teos, in Larissa, in Tamina, in Elboia, and of course in Athens itself. These were local competitions for the youngsters, not the great Pan-Hellenic meetings where nearly all the competitors were professional athletes who had been specializing since they were children.
Yeah.
Isn't that interesting?
It's really, really interesting.
A lot of people complain today about you're driving your kids too hard in athletics.
Yeah.
Right? They're not all going to be professional athletes. And maybe that's true. Maybe they shouldn't be driven so hard. But I think there's a thinking that this is some kind of new phenomenon. But no, it's not. It's ancient.
Been around for forever.
Exactly.
Yep. And I thought so. Marrou goes on to talk about so not only in Sparta where Sparta distinguished itself for having female athletics. As you get into the Hellenistic era, you have girls and boys both doing athletics,
right,
and almost training in the same events as well.
Right. You want to read that little quote about Chios there in the third paragraph?
Yes. So similarly, in the Hellenistic age, Sparta was no longer the only city in which girls received physical education on the same footing as boys, except, of course, for training for professional athletics. For in Chios, for instance, not only did the girls receive the same sports training as the boys, but they practiced with them on the same sports grounds. There seems to have been something similar in Teos, and to a more restricted extent in Pergamus, too.
Interesting.
So I think that's also, we've already talked about this, but I think it also kind of goes against, I think, stereotypes that I think a lot of people hold about the ancient world.
Antiquity. Mm-hmm. So in the next part, we're going to get into swimming a little bit.
I thought this was really interesting.
Yeah,
right?
Tell us more.
Can we jump into that?
Yeah, so to speak.
So
let's dive right in.
Let's dive right in. So Marrou talks about how we think of the Greeks as a seafaring people for good reasons. Right? They were great sailors and such, and they were also good swimmers. He talks about kind of a gnomic phrase.
I love this.
He says that to say he can neither read nor swim was a common way of describing a nitwit.
That's correct.
Yeah,
and the source there is Plato's Laws, and also the Suda. Yeah,
but swimming was not a sport that they did competitively.
Mm-hmm.
So they were good sailors, they were good swimmers, but they didn't jump into the Olympic pool and swim against each other.
Yes, I like this quote here. Quote, only in one place do we know that swimming competitions took place, or perhaps it was diving. The word kalumbos is ambiguous. This was at the sanctuary to Dionysius of the Black Shield near the small town of Hermione in Argolis. So no swimming competitions.
Right.
When people see the Roman baths, for example, they're often surprised because they're shallow. They're like a wading pool you'd find at a municipal park, right? You just put your feet in, basically.
Yes.
Am I supposed to sit down in that or throw coins into it?
Exactly.
Right? It's kind of the dilemma.
Right.
The Romans didn't swim.
No.
Not for pleasure or sport, I guess, to save their lives, but just like the Greeks.
Yeah, which is quite striking because of all the hundreds and thousands of miles of coastline. Right.
Greece has more coastline than any other European country.
Yes. Yeah. I guess that.
But what about boat races?
So there was tons of boat races,
Okay.
lots of regattas and different boat races. My sense is that if you're swimming, that's just evidence that you're doing the boating wrong, right? That you fell off the boat. Right?
I see.
So, but I mean, I may be prized as being able to swim to not drown,
Right.
as the Platonic phrase says, but it wasn't prized as a particularly competitive athletic ability. Stay on the boat.
Yeah.
Right.
So tell us about regattas, though.
So rowing regattas, as Marrou writes, were more frequent. There were boat races at the Athenaic Games in Corcyra, and at least from the time of Augustus in Nicopolis. In the Hellenistic and Roman era, the Athenian ephebes took part in dinghy races on the waters of Salamanos and Munahia.
Have you ever been in a dinghy race?
I've never been in a dinghy. I've been in a dinghy.
Yes, you have.
That's such a terrible word,
Isn't it?
It's awful, right?
Yeah.
So, I guess
I'm not
it just
sure.
means-
I'm not sure about the confines of this boat, but its name rings a bell. Because it's a dinghy.
Yes, I
okay.
gotcha. Yeah, right. Yeah, I'm not even sure what kind of ancient boat is implied by the word
I don't
dinghy
know.
here.
I know they had boats that were made of animal skin.
The Greeks did?
The Romans did.
The Romans
sure.
had?
I think the Greeks did too.
Okay.
Many different types of boats,
Right.
but not many of them good for racing, I guess.
Yeah. Well, but if we think about the Olympic ideal is if you're good at the Olympic events, that means you're likely to be a good soldier.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think if you're a good sailor, right, it's more important that you know how to navigate and race a boat than it is to swim.
That's true. And the Marines, right, the epibates,
Yeah.
right, the goal was not to actually do anything with a boat. It was to come up alongside the other person's boat
Yes.
and get the crew over as fast as possible
Right.
to inflict carnage and devastation.
Exactly. You kind of have a land battle on the planks.
Correct.
Yes.
The boat itself wasn't always a weapon of war. Yes, I know you could ram it and you could do the diec plus and the other kinds of fancy maneuvers.
Yeah.
But you really wanted to engage.
Yes.
That was the best.
Exactly right.
I like it when Marrou speculates a little bit. So at the bottom of page 118, he's talking about why did boat racing lack prestige? And he gives this explanation. He says, quote, I think that the comparative lack of prestige from which these sports, he means water sports, suffered was a legacy from early times. Most of the Greeks had become seafaring people, but they had not been so in the beginning. Their far-off ancestors had come from the north, from the continent, and it was from the knightly tradition introduced by these invaders that the sporting element in aristocratic culture directly derived. It was not particularly affected by any relics of the predominantly maritime Minoan civilization, which the invaders had succeeded in displacing around the shores of the Aegean. So we think about the funeral games in the Iliad, right? Long about book 23, 24.
Mm-hmm.
There are no nautical events, correct?
That's true. Yeah, right.
But of course, they do crop up in the Aeneid, right?
Yes.
In the funeral games for Anchises, we have, which I think is book 5, maybe. We do have
boat race.
Boat race.
Yeah.
It's very prominent, but I guess for the most part, just these were not the high-profile events. So let me ask: did you watch any Olympic kayaking? Be honest.
I did.
Okay.
I did. I watched one round.
Did you
of the
fall asleep during part of it?
I thought it was actually quite interesting.
Okay, tell me more.
Well, did you watch any?
About 30 seconds, and then I desperately said, let me find some track and field or anything that can get to the finish line fast.
Right.
Because I'm an impatient person.
But this was the whitewater.
I suppose.
Kayaking, right. So
I'm not concerned about the color of the water. The boating was slow.
Then we didn't watch the same thing. This was kayaks going down the rapid whitewater,
Okay.
having to navigate between these gates and having to go backwards up against the current.
All right.
It looked incredibly difficult.
So you don't find that it suffers from a lack of prestige?
Not that event.
Okay.
I find watching like sculling incredibly dull. Right.
Sculling is a kind of rowing?
Yeah, it's like the team rowing. You know,
Okay.
the guy in the front,
The
stroke.
coxswain.
Yes, stroke, right.
Right.
So I don't find that interesting at all. But I mean,
There's a job that could be replaced by AI. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
And a lot lighter than your average coxswain, I imagine.
Yeah, exactly. It's coming.
Yeah.
Yep.
Last little item, Jeff, before we start moving into the individual events in this chapter, which are so fascinating, is what about ball-based games?
Yeah, Marrou talks a little bit about
does.
this.
What do you think?
In this paragraph on 119. You want to read that for us?
Where should I start?
It says Greek physical education.
Okay.
Yeah.
Greek physical education, therefore, was primarily concerned with athletics pure and simple. There were various types of ball games, a variety of fives, a paraxis, throwing the ball, fininda. In the Roman era, there was harpaston, ball in a triangle, ball in the air. Does this sound interesting? And even a sort of hockey played with a crooked stick.
Okay.
Isn't our hockey played with a crooked stick?
It is.
Okay.
Yes.
But these were normally played by the younger athletes, along with other sports, and they were looked upon as amusements or at the most exercises. It is not surprising to find a physician devoting an entire treatise to their hygienic value. That's interesting. But they were not proper sports. He says they never became really popular like our modern rugby, football, or baseball. We never find them included in any of the games, either the great Panhellenic meetings or the ordinary municipal ones. Now, there's a contrast. The most popular sport in the United States of America is
football.
Is NFL, right?
Yeah.
And I would say probably NBA is a close second.
Right.
Soccer, the beautiful game, loved around the world, is getting a toehold in the United States.
Yes.
But where do track and field and things like that rank?
They
Bottom of the
barrel. They get their they're 15 minutes every 4 years.
That's right. In fact, barrel racing is probably more popular than track and field.
Yes. Interesting. I maybe in ancient Greek, or maybe even Marrou himself would say that's evidence of a coarsening of the idea of
you
sport.
think?
I don't know. Right.
Huh.
So, but when I hear, let's see, you want to go out back and play a round of ball in a triangle?
Yeah.
Or how about a couple of sets of ball in the air?
Yeah.
I don't know.
No. We don't want to talk about pickleball, do we?
Oh, I think you've ranted.
That was off the air.
You've ranted off the air about pickleball.
Privately to you.
Right.
Yeah, I'm going to have to undo my rant because I might get, I don't know what the word would be, shoehorned into pickleball.
Really?
Yeah.
Who's shoehorning you into pickleball?
We don't need to talk about it.
Right.
Okay, then he says,
yes.
I will now endeavor to give a brief description of each of these sports, comparing and contrasting them with modern athletic exercises, which, as will be seen, they sometimes resemble, but from which they can sometimes be very different.
Yes. Yep.
All right, Jeff, so the first one is running.
Right.
What do we want to say about that?
Well, I think it's the obvious place to start.
Okay.
I think when most people think about the classic Olympian sports, they still think of the race on the track.
Did they have obstacle or cross-country races?
They did not.
No is the answer.
Right. They had races of different lengths.
Right.
But they were all confined within a roughly 600-foot long stadium.
Right.
Yep.
Quote, all their racing took place on a straight, flat track. Did you watch Steeplechase?
I missed it this year.
Oh, you missed something great.
I can find a replay.
Do you want me to tell you what happened?
Please tell me what happened.
An American, Kenneth Rooks, came from nowhere and finished. I think he got the silver.
Really?
No one thought he would do well at all. It was high drama.
Yeah.
It was really fascinating.
Yeah. No, I thought there were a lot of the of the races that had kind of amazing,
surprising endings.
Kicks at the end.
Right.
People coming from out of nowhere. It was great.
Yeah. You ever done any running?
I mean, I was on the track team in middle school, and
Yeah.
I always loved it, but was never very good at it.
I was on the cross country team in high school for 1 year. I really enjoyed it. My fastest time in a 5K is about 100 meters. True story.
Wow.
But what does Marrou say?
He says the characteristic event was the stadium race, the stadion, which we might call the furlong, which was not only the most popular, but also to some extent the sporting event par excellence. The winner gave his name to the Olympiad. So already back then,
yes,
if you won, it's like kind of the 100-meter dash today. The world's fastest man.
That was the Usain Bolt.
Yes,
right? That Olympics was the Bolt, or that was the Sha'Carri Richardson, or Shelley-Ann Fraser Price, so on and so forth.
So so the winner of that race,
they named the whole event after him.
That's great. Yeah, the same word stadion was used for the race itself, the course over which it was run, and the distance covered. The latter was 600 feet. But as the standard foot was not the same in all cities.
Boy, that had to be a bummer.
Man.
You never knew exactly how far you were running.
Right. This represented a variable length of about 210 yards. It reminds me of some of the study of what we know about the people who built the Parthenon.
Right.
And there were people coming from all over with different standards of measurement.
Right.
And the way they had to, they found that famous Piraeus stone.
That's correct.
Which suggests that it was kind of
conversion stone.
A conversion key.
Right.
For all of these workers using different, feet.
That's incredible.
And so that must have been
a nightmare, right?
Nightmare. So if you're an Olympic athlete, but then you're also competing in the Pythian Games, the Nemean or the Isthmian, your distances were going to be different.
Correct.
Yeah.
You had to plan accordingly.
Right.
The Olympic Stadium, to continue Marrou, was about this length. The one at Delphi, about 194 yards. We've been up there and seen that one at Delphi, right?
It's beautiful.
Right at the very top. They don't let you in it for some strange reason. But
Yeah.
the one at Pergamus, to continue Marrou, about 230, but this was exceptionally long. The furlong was the shortest race. This seems strange to us, for although we run it ourselves, speak for yourself, Marrou, we generally look upon the 100 yards, today the 100 meters, as the real test of speed. Their technique was different from ours, too. They did not practice the kneeling start. Greek runners started from a standing position with their bodies bent forward and their feet very close together. You remember standing at Olympia,
Of course.
right?
That's what I always think of.
Trying to put your feet into those...
grooves.
That's right.
Yep.
The starting blocks.
Which are still there. And both of us have run
Oh, we have.
the track at Olympia.
Like the swift flying horses of Homer.
That's right, exactly, against students who were looking to
various
take us down. Right?
That's right, and often succeeded.
Yes.
One year there was a Calvin soccer student, and I thought, there's no way I'm winning this.
Yeah.
I'll just stay out.
You didn't even run?
No.
You chose not to run?
I chose not to run. Yeah. So there were a great many competitors, says Marrou. So they had heats and a final, just as we do. Isn't that interesting?
Mm-hmm.
What about the longer races?
So you had, there was what Marrou says, there was the double furlong.
The Diaulos,
Yes,
right?
twice around the course, or rather, as we see in a minute, there and back, which at Olympia would be 420 yards. Very nearly the same as our quarter mile. The 4-lap race, Hippios, was not so common.
So the Hippios is, I guess, you got to be a horse to do it?
Apparently.
Is that the idea?
Yeah, exactly.
But it's interesting that the quarter mile or the 400 meter, right? I watched a lot of the 400 meters this past week.
Yes.
Because apparently that is maybe the most difficult race.
I think so.
It's an all-out sprint
right
for a full circuit of the track.
Exactly. You can't, there's no pacing yourself against other runners. You are just all out.
There's no lawn chairs halfway through. No donut table. I would not survive.
Right, exactly. Now, the steeplechase is famous for having a great donut table halfway through. So we have, so there was the...
But what's the surprising thing? What does Marrou say is the surprising thing?
They didn't do laps, right? In the way that we, like around an oval. It was there and back, right? So you had the runners would line up across from a post, a meta, a turning point.
Mm-hmm.
And you, to do kind of a multi-lap race, you would run around that pole and back to where you started.
Completing the same circuit over and over, back and forth.
Right. Almost looks reminds me of... we called them, in basketball practice, suicides.
Or wind sprints.
Yes, exactly.
But I wonder, how could you keep track? Were there designated individuals?
There had to be counters.
Yes, because the fatigue, right? I mean, it seems like there'd be a lot of room for confusion and even cheating.
Right.
And maybe sabotage. Right. Because you're going to be running past someone who's either ahead of you or behind you.
Yes.
Right? So the tripping and...
Yes.
I was watching the men's marathon this afternoon.
Yeah.
I didn't watch the whole thing because it's 2 hours, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, those guys can run it in 2 hours. I don't have the endurance to watch it for 2 hours.
Right.
And all along the streets of Paris, people are holding out their cell phones, right? Because they want to get in on the action and photograph. I would have been doing the same thing were I there.
Yeah.
But I was so afraid that one of these runners is going to get clocked in the head with an iPhone 20.
Seriously. Right.
It could be a disaster.
Yeah. That's incredible, though. I mean, those guys are running sub 5 minute miles the whole way.
Yes.
It's unreal.
Yeah, something like 4:30 for 26 miles.
Incredible.
It is. But at least they have for the most part, a non-overlapping
right, exactly.
route.
Yes, right.
They show it going through the streets of Paris and around the Eiffel Tower and back. But for the Greek athletes, it was back and forth on the same 100 meters or 200 meters,
right?
Just endlessly.
Right.
Someone had to be keeping track.
Yes, I think so. But I think you alluded to this earlier, is that we know that cheating was an issue.
Yes.
At Olympia, if you were caught cheating, they put there was a statue of Zeus on the plaque or the inscription on the front. You were named, where you were from, and what the issue was.
What the infraction was.
Right.
Like a mugshot. At the stadium.
Yes.
So to finish up this part, most of the games also included an arms race, a hoplites, in which the runners wore a helmet and carried a shield. I like this little note. After 450 BC, greaves were no longer used. So greaves are shin guards.
Shin guards, right.
And it's hard to run in shin guards.
Yeah.
If you've ever watched baseball, sometimes the catcher will stay partly suited up.
Yes.
When he goes into bat.
Right.
And then at the last minute, he'll take off everything that he can because it's just so much work to take it on and off.
Right.
But to run in shin guards, like when he has to run down to cover first base,
Yeah.
That's a big challenge.
Big challenge, right?
So they said that's enough of the shin guards.
We'll let you go grieveless.
That's right.
450. Yep.
Mm-hmm. Distances varied, and the torch race was popular.
Yep. So all kinds of great. I admit that I love the idea of an arms race, and it's just a glaring reminder of that. This was really about a warrior ideal.
Yes, preparation for warfare.
Yep.
And speaking of preparation for warfare,
Yeah.
it's time for the ads.
Do it. This episode of Ad Nauseam is brought to you by the good folks at Hackett Publishing. Hackett Publishing, with their offices located in Indianapolis, Indiana, and Cambridge, Massachusetts. These guys have been with the podcast, with us from the very beginning.
Right.
They took a chance on a couple of knuckleheads who had a dream and an idea, and they're still with us today.
That's right.
And they're one of these
couple
places.
of starry-eyed youths.
Exactly. And they're one of these companies that is, and the phrase we like to use is keeping the flame alive. Now, Dave, as I'm getting ready to go back into the classroom in a couple of weeks, I am thinking about my students and the general brokenness of the today's college student, and I'm thinking, if there's any way that I can help them save money, I'm going to do it. And one of the ways I do it is by ordering textbooks from Hackett Publishing.
Absolutely.
Because it's not that their texts are cheap; they are high quality. Great translations, attractive artwork, but they keep them affordable.
That's right.
For students, for academics, for lay people who are just interested in this stuff.
Yes. So I'm at the Hackett Publishing website, browsing a little bit, perusing. And you said Indianapolis, Indiana, a young American athlete from Indiana. Did you watch Mr. Cole Hawker sneak through and get the gold medal?
Is he from Indianapolis?
He is from Indiana. I don't think he's from Indianapolis. I think it was the 1500 meter.
Yeah, it was incredible.
A shocker.
Yep.
Yeah. So guess who else does Olympic level work in Indiana?
Who's that?
Hackett Publishing.
Yes.
Did you like that connection?
Well done.
So here's what's on their website. Readings in Classical Chinese Philosophy, 3rd edition. Also Kierkegaard, Fear and Trembling. Classical Studies, Ovid's Heroides, translated by Stanley Lombardo and Melina McClure. And it just goes on and on. They have modern languages, cinema for French conversation, anything you'd like. Black protagonists of early modern Spain under the world literature category. And I could just keep reading titles here. It's a tremendous lineup of gold, silver, and bronze medal winning titles.
Excellent. So, listeners, I'm guessing if you're listening to this podcast, you're probably someone who takes a bit of pride in their own personal library. And if you want to add to it, be it works in classical antiquity or just a sampling that Dave just gave you from all other kind of corners of cultures around the world, do yourself a favor. Go to hackettpublishing.com, HACKETT publishing.com. And if you type in this coupon code, AN2024, that will give you 20% off your entire order, but also free shipping.
That's an incredible deal. Check it out. This episode of Ad Nauseam is also brought to you by the good folks at Racko Coffee. Mark Helweg, that incredible entrepreneur, has been bringing great coffee machines to the masses for, I'd say, just about a decade now.
Nice.
We got the Ratio 8. You back in service with your Ratio 8?
Not yet.
Close?
I'm close.
Okay.
I'm looking forward to it.
Had a little hiccup, needed just a little bit of an improvement.
Yes.
And how did you find customer service?
Brilliant and
Yes.
and quick and very, very friendly.
Yeah.
It was wonderful.
Absolutely. Good folks.
Yep.
So the Ratio 8, tell us a little bit about it, Jeff, if you could.
It is a sleek pour-over machine. It's a beautiful. It's a work of art that sits on your countertop. It's deceptively simple.
Yes.
All you have to do is get your grounds and your water ready, and you hit the button. And David takes you through 3 stages.
Yes. The first one would be the bloom, not the Alan Bloom, right? Closing of the American coffee machine.
Right.
But it was the bloom to allow the carbon dioxide to off-gas
Exactly.
into the biosphere.
Yeah.
The second stage would be the brew.
Indeed.
Now, here's where most of the work is done. You might say that this is the middle portion. You're out of the blocks, but you can't see the finish line yet.
Yes.
And you're keeping up the pace and you're chugging along. I should say that the Ratio 8 is you're just sitting by
Right.
comfortably. And then finally,
it's ready.
it's ready.
That's it. You've crossed the finish line.
The little LED button, the light comes on, you take it off in your carafe, you're ready to go.
You're ready to go. That's all there is to it.
It's incredible.
Yep.
Now, before I had the Ratio 8, my morning routine required me to use the old rotary phone,
Yeah.
and then I would call my local barista,
Yeah.
and they would come over, right? And stand there and do a pour over.
Right.
There were no buttons to push. I just had to wait. And let me tell you, it was really expensive.
I'd imagine
We were
every
on our
day.
second, third mortgage.
just a,
HELOC. But then along came the ratio 8, and my problems were solved.
Yes, that sounds great. Yeah. So, listener, if you want one of these wonderful machines, the 8 or the 6 are coming soon in October. The
October,
4,
that's right.
Yep. Which we will say much more about soon.
And give away at least one of these lovely machines.
Fantastic. Go to ratiocoffee.com. Find the machine that you would like, drop it in the grocery satchel. And Dave, what's our coupon code?
The coupon code is ANCOP8. Jeff, what does the P stand for?
It stands for phenomenal.
Phenomenal.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, and if they do that,
An
Dave,
aspirated plosive.
yes, exactly. Oh,
2 of my
that.
favorite syllables.
So if you type in that
consonants, sorry.
if you type in that coupon code ANCOP8, that will get you 15% off your entire order.
Check it out. All right, Jeff, as we get back into it, we are on to the long jump.
Yes.
And we're going to have to accelerate our pace.
Yes, we
We're going to
are.
have to stop running 18-minute miles here if we're going to get to the end of the chapter.
Right. Did you see a Greek won the long jump
I
competition?
did.
Yes.
Miltiades was his name.
Miltiades Tentonglu.
That's correct.
Yes.
Very impressive.
Right.
I also enjoyed the American commentators trying to pronounce all these Greek names. Like Paliniki. There was a young woman, one of the Greek athletes, Paliniki.
Yep.
In Greek athletics, says Marrou, there was only one kind of jump, the long jump. There was no high jump, no pole vaulting, and the standing long jump came only into training. It's interesting about the pole vaulting. We don't really have time for it, but I wondered who first thought of that.
Yeah. Right.
It's probably the Dutch, but it's a really impressive
The way
sport.
you would vault across your canals.
Yeah,
right?
well, you should know. These are your people.
Yes, it's
you got a pole at home?
I've never did canal vaulted.
You never do any vaulting in your clompin?
I got no clomping. I'm
no
so,
clomping?
I am so distant from my Dutch roots.
Okay.
Yeah.
Clompin are wooden shoes, just in case anybody wanted to know.
Yeah.
But what about the long jump?
Yes. So Marrou says that so there was no high jump, there was no pole vaulting, and the standing long jump came only into training. And here again, their way of doing it was different from ours. The run was shorter and slower. Now, from what I've read,
Yes.
We don't really know about any.
You think he's making it up?
No, I don't think he's making it up. I think he's working from kind of theories that
I see.
are, the evidence is slight.
How could it be slower? What would be the purpose in a slower takeoff?
I think probably he's talking about because we know that they held these weights in their hands.
Yes,
or these
but those were not just for training?
No, the vase paintings would show them. In the act, showed them in the air,
right,
with these things in their hands. Yeah. So the athlete had a firm takeoff, probably at the starting line, and landed on carefully leveled ground. The jump did not count unless his footprints showed clearly in the soil, and this excluded slides, falls, and even apparently landing with one foot in front of the other.
You had to land with your feet even.
You had to kind of stick the landing, almost like a floor routine.
Right.
But the most striking feature was that the athlete held a stone or bronze dumbbell, halteres, in each hand while he made his jump. These were round and could be either hollowed out so that they were easy to hold, or with a solid handle. In weight, they might be anything from 2 pounds to 10.
Jumping with 10 pounds? That's incredible.
It's really quite. This is one of these we do not understand, what exactly they were doing with these things, and they survive. At Olympia.
Yes, there's a museum there of athletics.
Yes, it's the one that nobody goes to.
I've been there.
I've been too. It's fascinating.
It's probably because Ken Bratt took us there.
right.
That small little old house on the hill.
Yeah,
a lot of these things are stored there.
But that's where you find the discus and these halteres there. Marrou ends this section says they were supposed to help balance the arms in much the same way as in our own standing long jump today. Again, we don't know.
No.
As I remember, there was a number of years ago, there was on the History or the Discovery Channel.
That's reliable.
Yeah, right. Where there was some professor of ancient sport that wanted to test these theories and took some athletes down to the track and had these weights and had them try different jumping techniques. And they were talking about, the 55-foot record of FIDE and saying, is there any way you could jump further by using these things, by swinging them out in front of you or dropping them? And they it was
you can't go as far.
Of course not.
Think.
Of course not. So it's one of these mysteries.
Yeah, my thinking was that at first was that it was like the donut on the baseball bat. You swing the bat with the donut on there, it's heavier. You take the donut off, and then you feel like now you have much more speed. Right. It's not like that.
I guess the counter argument is that, there's a number of vase paintings that would show the long jumpers.
Right.
And so the question, well, why would the vase painter be showing training
Yeah.
as opposed to kind of the main event?
Right.
But who knows?
Okay.
Who knows?
So we go on to throwing the discus.
Yes.
Unlike our discus, which he says is made of wood ringed with iron. I don't think that's what they're made of today.
Yeah, I think it's fiberglass today.
Is it fiberglass?
Something like that, yes.
Okay. You ever thrown a discus?
I have.
Wow.
Right. Oh, yeah, not well.
Okay.
But I remember, my friends on the track team, and just kind of hanging around
Right.
and picking one up and throwing. I think I actually
Did you crouch down into Myron's discobolus?
I might have done that
Yeah.
just to irritate people.
It's incredible.
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, tell us more about this.
Yeah, he says, quote, from the end of the 5th century onwards, it was made of bronze. It seems to have been heavier than ours, which weighs about 3 pounds, although the examples which have come down to us vary considerably and belong to different types, their weights being 3 pounds, 4.5 pounds, 6 or 9. There is even one of 12.5 pounds. That had to be like a trophy discus.
It's got to be, right?
Because I don't think anybody could chuck that.
That's crazy.
This may have been a votive discus and had no connection with those in general use. That's the one with Fisher-Price
On the
written
back.
On the back.
Right.
Yep.
So just for a modern comparison, and so in like Olympic athletics, men throw a 4.4 pound discus,
Okay.
and women throw a 2.2.
Wow.
So
incredible. So no doubt the type that was used was different in different places and at different times, and also according to who was using it. The lightest are the oldest, 6th century BC, and the children's discus was naturally lighter than the adults.
That makes sense.
That would be a really nice artifact to have from Antiquity. A child's discus. I wonder if any of those are for sale in the Antiquities markets of Europe.
Right, or on eBay.
Yeah, probably.
Right.
End quote.
But there's like with the long jump,
Right.
There's a lot of question exactly. Well, how did they throw it?
Right.
And does Failos's throw of 95 feet?
Right.
Is that impressive?
Right.
It
depends on how much it weighed.
I guess again, yeah, and the technique. So Marrou says the actual throw seems to have differed considerably from the style that was adopted when this event was revived at the first modern Olympic Games meeting held in Athens in 1896. There has been a great deal of argument about it in archaeological as well as sporting circles. The question is how to interpret the various sculptured monuments that exist. The vases and paintings and statues, the standing discobolus of Nalkidas, and above all, the famous bronze of Myron, which, since we now only have marble copies of it, and these damaged or clumsily restored, have been responsible for many wild hypotheses.
Yes.
So I'm sure our audience can picture that famous statue.
Yes, I hope so.
Bending over with the kind of the disc.
It's incredible.
Near the ground.
The moment of tension before he spins, rises up, and chucks the discus.
Right. And so, again, there's different theories about what the discobolus was doing after that pose. Is he spinning? There's other ideas that you grip the discus with 2 hands, and then you spun and flung it with
Right.
2 hands. But just as there were kind of differences in measurements, there are probably differences in style.
In technique.
Right? Now, today, if you watch the Olympic discus events, they all throw it.
Almost identical.
Identical. The same thing with the javelin and
Right.
the hammer.
Yes. Which is really shouldn't be called a hammer.
It's very strange.
It's like a bocce ball with a twist tie.
Right, exactly.
But boy, it can go a long distance.
Yes.
So I want to read a little bit here of what he says about how it was thrown. Quote, the thrower held the discus in both hands, lifted it to the level of his head, and then pressing it tightly against his right forearm with his hand, he brought, maybe Jeff, you should do like a demonstration here in the vomitorium.
No,
It seems like it's impossible.
It's impossible. I mean, hats off to Marrou to try to describe this, but I mean, halfway through, he lost me. I can't picture what's happening.
I'll continue. He brought this arm down violently behind him, his head and body turning and following the movement. All the weight of the body rested on the right foot, which acted as a pivot. The left foot and the left arm were simply used to keep the balance. Then came the fling. The force of it did not come from the arm, but from the sudden strengthening of the thigh and the bent body. I think that's the main difference, right? When you throw a discus today, the disc is out at the end of your limb, tucked underneath, and you're using a kind of centrifugal force,
right,
to get it spinning, and then off it shoots. This was thrown by suddenly standing upright.
Yes.
And the pivot of your hips, your lower and upper body, that's what launched it?
Yeah, I guess so.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, just picturing that and thinking about a throw of about 100 feet is
more impressive.
Phenomenal.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And the discus was rubbed with sand to prevent it from slipping. That must have been very comfortable.
Right.
So next we go to throwing the javelin.
Yes, another a sport that has a modern corollary. Marrou writes, throwing the javelin was not only a sport, it was useful in hunting and fighting. In athletics, however, the one idea was to throw it as far as possible in a certain direction. Whereas for its more utilitarian purposes, the thrower practiced by aiming at a horizontal target drawn on the ground. The sports javelin, which was the length of the body and as thick as a finger, it's really skinny.
Yeah, it is.
Compared to a modern javelin.
Yes, much heavier.
It had no point and was weighted at the end and seems to have been extremely light. And then also the method of throwing was also different. Marrou goes on to describe a kind of sling.
Yes, a catapult.
That was kind of attached to it, and you can see these also in vase paintings.
Correct.
It shows this, and so you're not gripping it, kind of around the shaft and throwing it forward, but you're kind of using a leather thong.
Yes, to put a spiral on it like a football.
Yes.
So it flies straighter and farther. I like this remark he made here. The value of this kind of catapult or sling, he says, which doubles or trebles the length of the throw, as you can easily discover if you try it out. But I don't have a javelin with a leather thong.
I'm sure Marrou had one in his office, right?
It keeps it flying straight like the barrel of a modern rifle. And on the other hand, it lengthened, so to speak, the thrower's arm and outstretched fingers. This was the great aim. Javelin throwers always had very long fingers.
Okay, I need to check his footnotes. I mean, he has a footnote there, and so
he has a footnote.
I trust him, right?
Yeah, a finger note. Next is wrestling, Jeff. What about wrestling?
So wrestling, Marrou suggests that even though the top runner would get his name affixed to the games, Marrou begins this section by saying wrestling enjoyed perhaps even greater popularity than running. There is fairly clear evidence for this in the fact that the word palestra, which strictly speaking meant a ground for wrestling, pale, was used for both sports field and the school for physical education. So it's one of those things. It's almost like so Xerox becomes
jacuzzi.
A jacuzzi just becomes a name for the whole business.
That's right, the most popular one.
And so any kind of training ground is known as the wrestling ground.
That's right. So what was the object of the wrestler? He says it was to throw his opponent to the ground without falling himself.
So not pinning them.
No, if he did, the throw was not counted. It did not matter how the opponent landed. He could fall on his back or his shoulder or his hip, but it was not enough merely to bring him to his knees. You had to throw him down. You could trip him, but you couldn't hold his leg. I think most contemporary wrestling is all about leg holds. That's where they primarily start.
Right.
The only holds were permitted on the arms, the neck, and the body.
Now, do you happen to know... so today there's the event. There's Greco-Roman wrestling.
Yes.
Do you know how that's different than?
I don't know.
Okay, neither do I.
Someone's listening. Maybe Gabrielle.
Yeah.
Cool. Maybe Mr. Flynn. Somebody's listening. They're gonna write in and they're gonna help us out with this.
Okay, we'll put that as an addendum.
Okay.
Yeah.
And while we're on the topic of viewer comments, we picked up a really nice one this week, Jeff.
Okay.
On YouTube. In response to our last episode with Patrick Owen, someone said, this is Action 16D.
Okay.
He or she marked the timestamp for when you made your pun about make America great again, grating cheese.
Yeah.
And the person said, quote, the reason it tastes better is because shredding it increases the surface area to volume ratio. It's the same reason you want your deli meat sliced super thin. Isn't that funny?
That's funny. I think Kramer discovered the same thing.
I don't know.
On Seinfeld.
I think the person thought, Jeff doesn't really understand why the shredded cheese tastes better. I better go to my keyboard and let him know.
Oh, that is hysterical. Thank you. What was it? Action 16D?
Action 16D.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, isn't that thoughtful?
I
thought that was delightful. We're almost done with wrestling, but we had 5 events, right?
Right.
The flat race, the long jump, the discus, the javelin, and the wrestling. That is the pentathlon.
Yes.
It makes up the best all-around athlete, as Marrou says.
Right. And so there is a modern track and field pentathlon today, which is made up of the long jump, javelin, the 200-meter dash, the discus, and the 1,500-meter run.
So people do the pentathlon? Because the Olympic events are the women's heptathlon, which is really amazing.
Right.
And then the decathlon which was won by a Norwegian, I think, this year.
I saw that too.
A guy named Root.
Another kind of unexpected victory.
Come from behind.
So I think the pentathlon is one of the things that kind of comes in and out. It'll sometimes be part of the games and sometimes not. But that is the modern pentathlon. So there is some overlap with...
You can't tell when they're going to hold it?
Well,
the pentathlon. I mean, you just don't know. You just show up, and how many events we doing today?
Right, exactly. Oh, are you in for 5, 7, 10?
I'll do 5.
We'll let you know. Yeah.
Okay. Next comes boxing.
Yes.
Are we going to make it to the end of the chapter?
I doubt it.
Okay.
I doubt it.
Boxing, at the beginning of the 4th century, says Marrou, hard bandages, himantes oxes, or sphirai, were substituted for soft bandages, himantes malakotoroi, for boxing. These hard bandages were a kind of glove, or rather mitten, for the fingers were left uncovered and were probably made of leather. They covered the wrist and most of the forearm. That's interesting, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And were fastened below the elbow by a sheepskin band. The fingers were kept in place by a supplementary bandage of 3 or 5 strips of hard leather held in position by laces.
So this makes me think of that magnificent bronze statue of the boxer, the seated boxer, whose face is all just just pummeled,
That's
beat
right.
up, and he has those
the gloves,
the stripped gloves on both hands. Yeah.
So how did the boxing of antiquity differ from what we do?
Marrou writes, it was somewhat different from the boxing of the present day. There was no ring, and this meant less clinching. So sometimes boxers will kind of hold on to each other to get a breather.
Right. You got to break that up, though, because it's really dull.
It is very dull.
Yeah.
Marrou continues, on the other hand, there was more scope for tactics and footwork. There were no rounds. The fight went on until one of the competitors was exhausted or admitted defeat by raising his arm.
Do you like that aspect of it?
I like the timed aspect.
You do like the timed aspect.
I do.
You guys just fight until someone dies or gives up?
It gives up, right. So, yeah. When I go to a sporting event, I like to have some idea of how long I'm going to be there.
Right. It helps you know how much popcorn to buy.
Totally right. The pace was consequently much slower than in modern boxing. As in the bare fist matches in 18th century England, blows were aimed chiefly at the head. This meant a high guard and extended arm. We are told that there was a champion in the reign of the Emperor Titus who could keep his guard up for 2 whole days and tire his opponent out without letting him land a single blow. So that's
impressive.
I don't want to go to a match that's going to last 2 days.
But the guy kept his forearm up, right, shielding his head from the blows.
Yes,
he didn't have to land any blows. He just had to receive all of them
and just wear the other guy. It was like Muhammad Ali's.
Yes,
the rope-a-dope.
Was that with George Foreman?
Yeah, something like that. Where Muhammad he didn't look like he was fighting back, but he was just tiring out his opponent.
That's right.
Then he could land the death blow.
Yeah.
Right.
Speaking of death blow, we go on to the all-in wrestling, the pancratium.
Yes.
Says Marrou, finally we come to the most violent and brutal event in ancient athletics, the pancratium, which is usually described as a combination of boxing and wrestling, but which was in fact very different from either. It was more like all-in wrestling. The aim was to knock one's opponent out or to make him raise one of his arms as a sign that he gave in. Anything was allowed. Not only the usual boxing punches and wrestling holds, but kicks in the stomach, twisting the arms and legs, biting, strangling, making him watch reruns of MASH.
Oh, man, this is brutal. This is inhumane.
I just added that in for you. Quote, the only thing that was disallowed was putting your fingers in your opponent's eyes or nose or mouth.
It's strange that they would draw the line there.
Yeah,
right?
Because you notice it doesn't include ears.
No,
you can stick your finger in your opponent's ear as far as you want, but the eyes, the nose, and the mouth, that's strictly off limits.
Right. So the modern corollary would be something like MMA, mixed martial arts, or some of these cage matches.
Do you watch that?
I don't.
I don't either.
It's too over the top for me.
Right. But if somehow it could be combined with NASCAR, then maybe I would be interested.
Like people driving and
really fast,
fighting in the car,
or driving to a destination the fastest and then getting out and fighting.
So just beating on each other.
I'm being facetious. Usually after a few passes, says Marrou, the two adversaries rolled onto the ground, locked together, and went on fighting there until the match was over.
Ooh.
The holds were very different from those used in ordinary wrestling and were known as culisses or halindesis.
He ends, it was thus a fairly brutal kind of sport, and the finishing touch was that it was fought out on ground that was not only dug up with a pick, but watered. So that the contestants floundered and slid and rolled about until they were soon covered in mud from head to foot.
Yeah. Well, I guess they were in for anything except don't stick the finger in the nose.
That's right. But exactly. Other than that, it's mud wrestling. It's more as a no holds barred.
Right.
Brutal.
Yeah. No thanks.
No, thank you.
Well, we go on next to the teaching of gymnastics.
Yes.
I think this is one of your favorites, isn't it?
This is one of my favorites?
No, I'm being facetious again.
Gymnastics. Well, when we Marrou uses the term gymnastics, we're not talking about the ribbon twirling.
There you go again.
I'm talking about something quite different.
Yeah, so Marrou says on page 124, the thing we know most about is the way wrestling was taught.
Mm-hmm.
The pedo tribe used to teach the different positions or figures, schemata, in turn, and then the wrestler would use them in the actual match. In a papyrus dating from the 2nd century AD, we have a fragment from a master's handbook, which enables us to watch a wrestling lesson being given to 2 pupils. This was fascinating.
This was great, right?
This is from the Oxyrhynchus papyri, number 466, in fact.
Yeah.
You want to read some of this, Jeff?
I do. So this is the coach,
right?
Kind of yelling to the two wrestlers.
Yeah. Do you remember running up and down the court when you were in your basketball days?
Yeah.
And the coach is screaming at you from the sidelines. I mean, that's a traumatic moment for a kid.
It
right?
is, exactly.
All you're thinking is, I just want to put the ball in the hoop. Nothing else matters.
That's right. But how many times did I have to hear, Winkle, you're going the wrong way? Right. So here, this is great. So the coach is yelling here. And he says, get up close to him and put your right arm around his head. You, put your arms around him. You, get hold of him from underneath. You, move forward and hug him. You, get a hold of him from underneath with your right arm. You, put your arms around him where he has got hold of you from underneath and bring your left leg up to his side.
Hold on a minute.
What's going on?
Hold on. I'm a little uncomfortable with the volume and intensity of the you shouting.
Well, that's implied here.
Okay.
It's like, hey.
But it's listed in the translation, every one of them.
This is the direct translation right here.
Yeah, and not only that, but it sounds more like it's a game of Twister.
It does.
You, get hold of you from... put your arms around him where he has got hold of you from underneath and bring your left leg up to his side. Right hand blue.
Right. Exactly.
Left foot green.
Totally.
Anyway, go ahead.
Goes on. You push him away with your left hand. You change your place and clasp him. You turn round. You catch hold of him by the you-know-whats. You bring your foot forward. You can get. I can't imagine the match going on beyond that line, but here we go.
And can you imagine the poor kid in the ring who's trying to do all this stuff in real time while he's being yelled at?
Just a couple more to go. You get hold of him round the waist. You throw your weight forward and bend him backwards. And finally, you bring your body forward and straighten up. Pounce on him and give him as good as you get. Wow. Man.
Oh, that's brutal.
It is brutal.
That's brutal.
Oh, yes.
So then Marrou says, thank you, Jeff. He says, I have ventured to translate this passage, which is in fact very obscure. Hellenistic Greek had an extraordinarily rich vocabulary of technical terms for teaching purposes, and its secrets are difficult to fathom, but it was so familiar to the average cultivated reader.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
It really is. It's good. I love the way that Marrou will use this. Again, this is kind of an example of one. But I love how he puts that and gives us, it kind of brings us right into the middle of it. Yeah, it's incredible.
I did a little bit of coaching assistant to the assistant coaching.
Yes.
This past fall of my daughter's basketball team.
Oh, yeah.
And maybe I should have tried some of this. You put your arms around her. You know, shoot the 2-pointer.
Yeah, you probably could have won a few more games.
Probably could have. So moving right along then, and in the interest of time, we're going to kind of go lightly over, skip completely, the care of the body and the loosening up exercises.
Yes.
This is all about how to rub and apply oil and scrape the skin with sand and put some dust on and take some dust off.
Yes.
If you're really interested in this topic, get the book and check it out, I would say.
Indeed.
So let's move right into section 130, the decline of gymnastics.
Right. So Marrou argues that over time, athletics, I think he puts it somewhere around the 4th, 5th century.
Yep. AD. Yep.
Athletics starts to lose kind of its elevated place in culture and is no longer kind of a central part of education.
Right. You want to begin, read the beginning of that section there?
This brings us to the end of our brief account of the physical education of old, its events, methods, and conditions, which, by ancient and modern historians alike, have been acclaimed as the distinctive feature of the education of those days. But though sport continued to occupy a prominent place in education, in the first centuries of the Hellenistic era at least, it must be realized that it had lost its earlier vitality. It was a heritage of the past, looked upon with reverence, no doubt, but no longer essential to the culture of the future. Hellenistic physical education remains static, in fact, showing very little change from that of the previous centuries. The only notable development, as we have seen, were the Swedish health exercises.
So what are those, Jeff? Those cropped up throughout the chapter. Did you look those up?
I didn't know. Sweden is hanging out in a spa.
It has to do with meatballs. If I'm not
Meatballs
mistaken.
and shopping at IKEA.
Yeah.
Right.
I don't know what that... I think the Swedish exercises are a kind of calisthenics.
Yes. I think that's
stretching and certain types of old-fashioned weightlifting, kettlebells and things like that.
Yes. Yeah, that's right. Yep.
Which were popular at the time of Marrou's writing.
Yeah. Yeah, indeed. He continues, it made no further progress. It was faced with the competition of the professional athletes, and technically the sport learned in the schools could not bear comparison with the professionals, which started giving its champions specialized training from the time that they were children and achieved a higher standard of performance all around. But the main cause of the decline of athletics was, as we shall see, the development of other subjects, especially literature.
Now that's just stunning. Sports became less popular because reading took over?
Yeah, it's hard to believe.
Yeah.
Right. This had become the really dynamic element in the culture of the day, and it tended to monopolize the whole of young people's time and energy and interest. So we're kind of back to where we started. So sport becomes a leisure activity for students, no longer a central part of their education.
Not a civic activity really for warfare.
Right. Well, at the same time, it's also becoming professionalized. Right. At another level. Yeah.
Fascinating. I like again where he speculates. My own opinion, quote, is that athletics slowly lost the prestige and importance that they originally had in Greek education. This is, of course, difficult to prove satisfactorily, though it is worth reading what Xenophon said about Jason of Phares, 375 BC, in the Hellenics. I do not think, however, that it can be seriously doubted, though I am aware that my statement would not be allowed to pass unchallenged by the specialists. So, in other words, it just ceased to be so popular.
Yep. Incredible.
Well, to close up the chapter, we should probably see what happened to athletics during the Christian era. And this is on page 132. It's the first open paragraph. Could you read a little bit of that for us, Jeff? Please?
Sure. No one denies that physical education was quite dead in the Christian era, and that its death had been a natural one, unaccompanied by any violent revolution. History would have told us if there had been anything of the kind. It had simply died of old age. The attitude of Christian moralists and apologists seems to confirm this view. There would have been so much that they could have objected to in ancient gymnastics, its immodesty, its sexual immorality, its vanity. And yet, strange to relate, they do not seem to have done so. It is true that the fathers of the church have many pages dissuading Christians from the passion for athletics. But the remarkable fact is that their criticism is directed against sport as a spectacle, against professional sport, not against any kind of amateur sport. For example, St. Gregory Nazianzen, writing to his great-grandnephew Nicobolus somewhere between 384 and 390, denounces the frivolity of people who waste their time and money at the stadium, or the palestra, or the circus. But this criticism is simply one of many, and they are all directed against shows of one kind or another, the bloody combats in the amphitheater, the indecent mimes in the theater. This had also been the attitude of the 2nd and 3rd century apologists Tatian and Tertullian. It was as a form of entertainment, not as a system of education, that athletics presented a problem for the Christian conscience.
So as long as it was confined to a mode of education,
yes,
and it was kept within certain limits, the Christian apologists did not object to it.
Right.
It's when it became entertainment, blood sport, and consuming, I guess, of the culture as a whole.
Yes.
Then guys like Gregory Nazianzen, Tatian, Tertullian, then they started to pay attention and criticize it.
Yeah, and I mean, there's so many people making those same kind of arguments today.
Right.
Kind of those amusing ourselves to death kind of arguments.
That's true.
Right? Yeah.
Seldom talking about the vanity aspect, though. You don't find that very much.
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah. But also Marrou says in the very final paragraph, I won't quote, but just mention that St. Paul, right, 1 Corinthians chapter 9, those who run in a race all run, but only one receives the prize.
Yes.
The New Testament is filled with athletic metaphors.
True.
Constant struggle. And John Chrysostom, end of the 4th century, they could not have conducted their careers, Paul and Chrysostom, without using athletics as a way to explain spiritual realities.
Yes. Yeah, very, very true.
Well, I guess we have to wrap it up, don't we, Jeff?
We do.
This one's gone a little long, but hey, it's like a marathon of classical podcasting.
Right. But why is it exactly that we have to get out of here?
Oh, why do we have to get out of here exactly?
Yes.
What precisely is the reason?
Is there pounding on the door?
There's a lot of pounding on the door.
Yeah.
Someone wants to get in here. In fact, it is the heirs of Mr. Frank Whitehead.
Who?
You know, Frank Whitehead.
Oh, the inventor of Racko?
That's correct.
Oh, this guy.
It's a Milton Bradley sequential matching card game with the objective of obtaining 10 numbers in numerical order in one's hand or in one's little rack. How do you keep score, Jeff?
How indeed. It's
just read the script there. Score
may be kept on a separate piece of paper based upon either a custom system or the system provided in the rule book. Oh my gosh!
How does Ryan review Racko for us in an online review of Racko? Because I thought this was quite interesting.
He says, this game reminds me of something I would have played with my mom and my aunts at a younger age, probably camping or something. You know the ones I'm talking about. You get sucked into some simple card game like Crazy Eights or Cribbage and played for hours on end. There isn't a ton of strategy involved in this one other than trying to find the best spot for your card.
Isn't he exaggerating? There's no strategy in this game. That's it.
That's it.
Is to find the best spot for your card.
Right. There's a lot of luck of the draw involved as well. Normally this combination in a board or card game would probably make the game fall into the dislike pile for me, but not this time. I think the reason for it staying more in my good graces is because of the calmness of it. The game doesn't take much thought or effort. It feels more like a game you are playing to keep yourself busy and or as a side event.
Yeah, I thought that was a good metaphor for ending the podcast, right? It doesn't take much thought or effort. It feels like something you could listen to keep yourself busy,
right,
as a side event.
So they're trying. The heirs are trying to get in here. They're upset about our kind of our.
That we've been running down Racko.
Gotcha,
they want to get in here. They want to take over the vomitorium.
Yeah,
pounding on the door. They're trying to get some kind of a Rackessance, right?
Going, yeah, that's right.
Just to bring it back to popularity.
Right. And so we're standing in the way.
We are. So we better hightail it out.
All right. Well, let's get out of here.
Before
we do, Dave, would you please tell us if our listeners want to learn some Greek, if they want to learn some Latin, you have methods for doing so.
I do. Go to mossmethod.com. Check out my Greek program to take you from
neophyte to erudite.
Thank you, Jeff. And you can sign up at self-paced, expert, and accessible. Earlier in the program, Jeff said, Dave, can you read a couple of lines of Greek poetry? And I made my way through. How did I do that, you ask? Or I'll ask for you. Years of study. Can you access that? You can. I compressed it down into this course. Check out my free offerings and then check out the Greek. Also have Latin.
Yes.
LatinPerDiem.com/LLPSI. Lingua Latina per se illustrata, or Latin teaches itself, as I like to say. Signing up students for the fall. We had a flash sale last week, you might remember.
Yes. What was that for?
Oh, well, we had 17% off for one day, remember?
I do remember, yes.
I think maybe we should call it, based on the response, a flash in the pan sale. But we'll have a back to school sale coming up. Maybe Excellent. It's just not the right time for people to start learning Greek and Latin, but it's coming up.
Yeah. Excellent.
Whom do we need to thank?
As always, Mishka, our wonderful engineer, putting this together, turning it around so quickly and making us sound better than we actually are. Also, these guys on guitar, Scott Vincent and Ken Tamplin, who have so generously allowed us to use their music. They are the ones behind the bumper music and the intro music that you hear.
The outro music.
It's
in the
coming
show. Up. Yep. So grateful for their generosity. Jeff, if they want to get in touch with us and complain.
Yes. If you want to correct all the stuff we got wrong today, you can write to Dave at Navseam.com.
If you want to inflate the ego of Dr. Winkle,
please do.
Write to Jeff at Navseam.com. Don't forget the V. You can go to the website, click on the shop tab, and pick up a Quai No Kent, Do Kent t-shirt.
Yes.
Show the world that you're taking in the classics.
And keeping them down.
Jeff, what is on tap for next week?
I think we got one of our classic TBDs, right?
All right.
Yep.
TBD never misses.
No, I've got some ideas.
Okay, great.
But we'll see.
All right.
How it goes, yeah.
And I believe, Jeff, that you have our gustatory parting shot.
Yes, this is one of the great and famous and odd quotes from film history out there. This is spoken by the character Clemenza from one of my favorite movies of all time, The Godfather.
Now, which one is that? Is it 5, 6?
This is the first one.
Oh, the very first
the original,
one.
1972.
All right.
Yes.
And what does Clemenza say?
He gives this is just good advice. Leave the gun, take the cannoli.
Okay. Or the cream horn.
The cream horn. No, doesn't sound quite as good.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks.